Right, so on to today's business. And our first topic is digital business from strategy to product specification. And I'm delighted to introduce a gentleman that I've worked with for some time now. In fact, newly elected chair of the Open Group Governing Board here at the Open Group. So Chris Frost is a principal enterprise architect at Fujitsu. He's based in the UK and he's worked for Fujitsu since 2005 in a variety of technical leadership roles. At present, he is, as I say, principal enterprise architect with the Global Delivery Architecture Division, which is responsible for global architecture standards and governance. Within the Open Group, he's the newly elected chair of the governing board, as I say, co-chair of the Digital Portfolio Working Group, and a contributing member in the Architecture Forum and the Open Footprint Forums. And in this session, Chris will provide some background and context on a new standard being developed by the Digital Practitioners Working Group. So I won't steal your thunder anymore, but a very warm welcome back from the Open Group to Chris Frost. Over to you, sir.
Steve, thank you very much. And, I'll just take a moment, if I may, just to share, first of all, the happy retirement message to Paul Homan. If he's either watching this or a recording or something like that. And also just to say hello to Aramco. Delighted to have them on board as platinum members. So, turning to the subject to today, and Steve or one of the team, if you wouldn't mind just confirming you can see the slide sharing okay. I'm just on the opening slide right now.
Yes, we can, Chris. Yeah.
Thank you. So my topic to today, as you heard from Steve, is digital business from strategy to product specification. And essentially, this is about some work that's in progress within the Digital Portfolio Working Group. And going to cover 4 points as we go through today. First of all, just give you a little bit of background as to what we're doing, why we're doing it. Then go on to the vision of what we're hoping to achieve with this new work, the DP-BOK restructure, as we're calling it. I'll come to that in a few slides' time. Then I'll give a sneak preview of some of the progress that we're making, some of the things we're working on right now, some of the interesting ideas that we're discussing with the working group and the models we're coming up with. And then I will round off with a few conclusions for you. So to start on that, a little bit of background to begin with. First of all, just some things that have been going on in the Open Group recently, and in particular the Digital Portfolio Work Group. We have a current standard that's published, the Digital Practitioner Body of Knowledge Standard, as it's called, or DP-BOK to its friends. And that was published in 2020 by this working group, the Digital Portfolio Working Group. And essentially, it describes a set of 12 competency areas, as they're called, essentially sort of high-level skill definitions, competency areas that are needed by digital practitioners. Now, as I mentioned, that was published in 2020, actually very near the beginning of 2020. So, as a consequence of that, the work to write that material was finished in 2019, and so the techniques and the technologies that it describes in the DP-BOK are those from 2019. And as anybody who works in this industry will know very well, things move on quite quickly, so it is time to review and refresh that material. A second point I'd like to make is about one that just really came along just from conversation within the group when we were talking about what we were going to do with the DP-BOK. Some of the common challenges that we were seeing in digital businesses, both within our own companies, because of course as members, we're all employees of our employing companies, engaged typically in this sort of business. And for many of us, including myself, our business is about serving other customers with their businesses. So one of the common challenges that we saw very much in digital business was this one: translating business strategy to digital product specifications. And what do I mean by that? If you think of it as a simple sort of three-step process, grossly oversimplifying it, of course, but start with some business strategy. Then something happens that seemed a little bit magical, a little bit mystical, to finally end up with digital product specifications. And it's that piece in the middle that's sort of quite interesting and isn't so well described and talked about in a lot of material. There's a lot of material out there, both within the open group and elsewhere, about how to define business strategies. There's quite a lot of material out there already about how to develop a digital product once you've got to the point of at least an outline of what it's going to be. But it's that piece in the middle that seems particularly challenging. So we thought it would be useful to explore that a little bit more. So to explain a little bit about where we're intending to go, the DP-BOK restructure, as we've been calling it within the working group, the vision we set ourselves, the structure we wanted to develop was essentially in these two parts. First of all, some fundamental concept, which would describe the core ideas, the enduring, well understood, accepted foundational concepts, things that don't change very often. And then related to that, we're developing a number of what we're calling playbooks. And these are essentially guidance. There may be guidance on novel techniques or innovative cutting edge problems. They may even be speculative, or there may be more around guidance on more established practices. And within the working group and with others, we've sort of used this graphic, this visualization, how we have this core at the center, of the new material. And then a number of playbooks kind of around the edge, linked to that core material. And although the writing's rather small on this diagram, you can see perhaps that there are a number of topics written into those playbooks that are around the edge of the circle there. But these were just sort of indicative of the types of things we thought we might want to work on, and not necessarily the playbooks that are currently under development. But give you an idea of the sort of things that we've been talking about. One thing we did decide right at the beginning was that we would start with a clean sheet of paper. We wouldn't necessarily automatically start with the existing contents of the DP-BOK and go on to rework that. But we would reuse that, we would reintroduce that, pull that forward where it was appropriate. So this is how we set out to structure the work, and indeed how we have started. Now I want to move on now to talk about some of the work in progress. Just give you a little sneak preview of some of the things that we've been looking at, some of the ideas that we've been developing within the working group. Right now, we've got some work in progress on that fundamental content, that part that was at the center of that circle that I showed a little while ago. And we've got 4 playbooks currently on the go at various stages of drafting and review right now. So we've got a substantial amount of material that's already being developed. And I just want to give you a little bit of a peek on some of the things that we're working on. So I mentioned when I was talking about that 3-step process, with that sort of little bit of mysterious magic in the middle. Another way you might describe that is what I've got on screen now. This idea that yes, you start up with some business strategy, you end up somehow with some definitions of products, and essentially that sort of bit of magic in the middle is the bit where you're thinking about your portfolio. And this is the sort of life cycle that you might typically see in textbooks, or there is indeed lots of material out there on the internet that sort of talk about this flow from strategy through product through portfolio and into product. And indeed, for most in large enterprises, mature companies, this is indeed typically how it's done. And I suppose, in my own company, it's been typically followed that way with, for example, some of the new strategy that we've been developing around a thing which we call UVANTS, a new set of digital products. That was the strategy work to come up with the overall approach that we wanted to follow. That then led on to a number of portfolio definitions. And then now finally that's being realized as a number of products both on the market and being developed. So this is a fairly typical sort of approach. However, it's not always that way. Doesn't take too much thinking to think about some examples where essentially that business strategy, first of all, really focus on just a very singular product. Think about, for example, Apple iPhone, or maybe even Amazon.com starting out selling just books and CDs on a single website. So there you see, after some strategizing, no doubt, the entire focus being just on a singular digital product. And then sometime later, that develops into a wider portfolio. So again, you can take the example of things like the iPhone. You can think how that's been developed out into other associated services, music services, TV services, cloud services, things like that. And likewise, of course, clearly Amazon.com from those beginnings of selling CDs and books online has fanned out into a whole enormous portfolio of products. So that's another possible arrangement you might see. But it doesn't stop there. Sometimes, and typically perhaps in the arena of small startup companies, then in fact you just go straight to the first product. So think of something like an Uber or an Airbnb, where essentially the entire focus of the company starts off just around a singular product. And all of the focus on getting that working and working at scale and acquiring market. And then later on, then thinking about how that might be further developed into a wider portfolio of products and the strategy that might underpin that. So different arrangements of these sort of three fundamental stages. But however you might arrange that, there's another important thing that runs alongside all of these things, and that we've described as value analysis. I think it's fairly evident what we're talking about there. That's the process at all stages of strategy, portfolio, product definition, where you're considering how is this going to develop, how is this going to deliver value both for myself and for my customers. Now, if we look at that first step, as I showed it just a moment ago, business strategy. As I'm sure many all know, there are many existing, well-established frameworks already out there for business strategy. An example comes from the Open Group's own IT for IT standard, where within that you've got the reference architecture that essentially spans the whole of the digital business lifecycle from strategy all the way through to operations, and the strategy functional component, as it's called within the standard, that defines the necessary strategy functions and inputs and outputs. Others, Vimosa, some of you again may be familiar with this one, gives an approach, essentially a set of techniques for how you would work through creating, first of all, an organization's vision, then developing that into a mission statement, objectives, strategy, and actions. And the technique Vimosa, taking its name from the initial letters, the acronym Vimosa, VMOSA. Strategy diamond is another example. Essentially, that defines the key components of a good strategy. So as you're going through developing a strategy, it's a useful, almost sort of checklist, not quite template, but it gives you a good steer as to, have I covered all of the things that I should be covering in the definition of a strategy. Another one to mention is Blue Ocean, well-known technique for exploring new and uncontested market space. This idea of the wide blue ocean that is as yet unexplored. And then finally, to mention here the business motivation model. Again, another model of the fundamental concepts within business strategy, and the BMM describes what it calls the means, the ends for strategy, the influences you need to consider, and how you might assess the impacts of those influences. So there's a number of well-known existing frameworks, and the reason for me sort of explaining these now is to say that within the work we're doing, we're therefore just referring to things like this with short summary and some appropriate links, because this is already a quite well explored area of tools and techniques, and so there's really not much to add to that. This is already quite well matured and thought out. However, another area we've been thinking about is product development, and in particular some of the challenges within that. A way to look at that is this, is with this little graphic that we've been thinking about. Digital products moving through a series of stages that you might call idea to try to product, meaning that you start off with just some idea in your mind about potentially a good idea for a product. Then you might move on to trying it out, or some parts of that product, some experiments, MVP, prototypes, call it what you will, until eventually you get to some viable product, some stable product that you can confidently sell at scale in the marketplace. And we've used in the conversations within the working group, as we've been talking about this, we've been using this graphic and what we've been calling the black bars of death between the three stages. And the point of that is to highlight the failures, frankly, the challenges, the difficulties, the failures of moving between those stages. And the key message is from it that we've got some really interesting observations from one of our members, is that the sorts of ratios that they've been seeing through these stages is about, as you can see on the screen, 15 to 4 to 1, meaning that very roughly 3/4 of ideas are abandoned before becoming tries. And then of those tries, about another 3/4 of those are abandoned before coming products. So that's the black bars of death, as we've been calling it, moving from that stage of idea to try to product. And yeah, the word we've used is brutal, because it really does show that reality of these sorts of approaches, where you do have to be prepared for having, maybe 15 good ideas before you can get to one viable product that is actually successful at scale and over time within the marketplace. And something else, I mentioned a few slides ago that while we have been starting with a clean sheet of paper, we would use material from the existing DP box, some of the ideas within the existing standard that are still valuable, that are still current, and still useful to pull forward into the next iteration. So we have been carrying forward some of the concepts of the new standard into the new standard from the 2020 DP bot. One of those things is this thing we call the scaling model. Some of you may have seen this. Um, it's essentially trying to explain how you've kind of got these four stages as you grow a business, certainly a digital business, also true of other types of business. In the beginning, you just have a singular or maybe one or two founders of a company, as it says here, 1 to 3 employees, maybe, quite a small organization at that point. Then if that continues to grow and succeed, then you find yourself really with a team at that point, and continuing to grow to teams of teams. And by this stage, you're looking at maybe 40, 50, 60, 70 or so people. And then finally to those companies that make it all the way through this process to something larger, to something more enduring, a large scale enterprise, which can have many hundreds, thousands, even hundreds of thousands of employees. And at each stage, there seems to be some sort of plateaus, as they're often called, hence the little sort of flat plateaus on the diagram that sort of indicate growing difficulties, growing pains as you transition from each of those, from the founder to now having a team around you, to now having to work with teams of teams, to then eventually transitioning and growing into a large enterprise. And that fits in with the competency areas that I mentioned right back at the beginning. So, whoops, if I just slide back one, the competency areas are arranged along this scale of the scaling model that I was just describing. So in the beginning, as an individual or a founder, then the sorts of things that you're thinking about are, the very fundamentals of digital business, what I can do, how I can create some useful value for myself and customers, the digital infrastructure I need to run it on, and some sort of application to run on top of that. So again, you can think of Jeff Bezos in his garage with the embryonic Amazon.com. If I recall correctly, I think it was some Sun servers, digital infrastructure running, obviously, the beginnings of the Amazon.com application. And that's where you are. Those are the sorts of competencies typically in these beginning stages. You then grow up into a team, that sort of stage where you've got 5, 6, 7 people, that sort of size. You now need to think a little bit more about how I'm going to manage this product, how I'm going to manage the work amongst the different people within my team. And probably that by that point, you've got at least one person who's focusing specifically on the operational aspects, the day-to-day aspects of running that server or whatever it is, and all of the physical or electronic logistics around that, and all of those day-to-day things. Then as you continue to grow, teams of teams, the sort of competencies that become relevant there are coordination and process. It's probably around about this point that as a developing company, you're now starting to formalize some of the processes that you need to go through, and you need to now do that because of the numbers of people that you've now got engaged in this. You need to put a little bit more structure around it all. You start to need to think a little bit more consciously about the perhaps about the portfolio that you're now developing and how you're going to invest in some of these things. What areas are you going to invest in? And organization and culture. Now you've got that team of teams. What are all those teams doing? How are they organized into flat structures, hierarchical structures, helix structures, whatever? These are things that you're now having to think about, the competencies that you now require as you've grown to that stage. And then finally, when you get to the enduring enterprise, as it's described here, the sorts of competencies that now become relevant are things like governance, risk, compliance, security, all of those enterprise disciplines, which don't want to imply that these things are not relevant. I'm sure even if we take Jeff Bezos again with his Sun server in the garage, I'm sure he thought a little bit about security, even on that simple singular Sun server, log-on rights and things like this. But it's when you get to this sort of stage, then during enterprise, that I've now got perhaps a whole team, a whole set of processes and policies around security in that example. And similarly for governance and risk and compliance and all of these sorts of things. Information management becomes something I now need to focus on. Now I've got to the stage of being a large and enduring enterprise, hundreds of employees, possibly thousands of employees, probably spread across multiple locations, maybe even across multiple countries as you continue to grow. So am I going to manage all of that information? And of course, very relevant to things like digital business, digital practitioners, and some of the other standards that I'm sure some of you will know within the open group, a topic that we talk about quite a lot, architecture. By the time you're getting to this sort of stage, then during enterprise, that topic of architecture, especially as you're developing digital products, becomes very important to make sure you've got all those correct underpinnings, that you're following all of those good practices to develop your digital products. So that's one of those things, a good enduring concept that we've taken forward from the 2020 DPBOK, the original DPBOK, into this new DPBOK restructure, as we're calling it. Another thing that we've been just thinking about, just literally within the last few weeks, is what does the evolution of standards delivery mean for this? And what do I mean by that? Well, if you go back, I don't know, 20, 30 years, maybe a little more. If you wanted to know something about a standard, if you wanted to know the details of some standard, you probably had to go to a book. You probably had to go to the bookstore, or possibly order something over the telephone and get a book delivered through the post that told you the specifications of that standard. Then gradually, as electronic connectivity came along, and particularly the internet, of course, it became possible to download these things. So standards, along with many other things, were then typically delivered as downloadable PDFs. And although you probably can't read it, carefully composed a little directory of some downloaded PDFs, which are the composite parts of some open group standards. So some parts of TOGAF standard, of the Open Agile Architecture standard, and of the Digital Practitioners Body of Knowledge. As time has moved on, of course, now web-based delivery. So again, this example taken from some of the open groups, some of our own deliverables. This is a view of our digital portfolio, the portfolio of digital open standards. This is one of the web pages presented at the top end of that gives you a much more sort of point and click interface to navigate through and search the standards. And that's probably indicative of where a lot of the sort of standards delivery is at the moment. And of course, now, within just the last year, maybe 18 months or so, we've seen the emergence of these sort of chatbot style deliveries where instead of navigating a set of web pages or downloading some PDF, you perhaps want to have more of a conversational type of interface with some sort of AI-driven chatbot. Um, so we've been giving some, a little bit of thought about, what does this mean for us? What should we be seeking to do within the working group, and why within the open group against that sort of evolution that we've seen in the way standards are typically delivered and that people want to consume them. So coming towards the end, and just a few concluding remarks. I hope I've explained how within this working group, the Digital Portfolio Working Group, we're developing this new body of knowledge, the DPBOK, as we call it, along the theme of translating digital business strategies into product specifications. We've got a number of areas of work in progress, and I've given you a sneak preview of some of the ideas we've been exploring, some of the new ideas we've been capturing, and indeed some of the previous concepts that we've reviewed and thought, yep, that's still got a lot of value, that's still got a lot of currency. We'll bring those forwards into the new pieces of work. And hopefully, if some of that has interested you, if some of those ideas have made you think a little bit, and even if you've thought perhaps, well, gee, gosh, I could do a whole lot better than that, or hey, that's very similar to the sorts of things we've been doing, some of the ideas we've been developing, then I would love to give you this message. Join the working group. Join the working group. The Digital Portfolio Working Group is open to all members of the open group, and we are looking for more contributors to help us develop this new piece of work. So, if some of the ideas we've been talking about have interested you, and you think you might have something to say and something to contribute to this piece of work, then please do get in touch. There's some points of contact here that I've given. You can see the first one there is myself, Chris Frost. There's my email address, and I'm the co-chair of the working group. So by all means, get in touch with me. Or the other two contacts are two of my colleagues from the open group, Sonia Gonzalez, also her email address here. She's the product manager for this piece of work. Or Michelle Horobin, again, email address. She's the forum director responsible for the work within the Digital Portfolio Working Group. So we'd love to hear from you. Hopefully some of that has given you some interesting insights into what we're doing. And with that, Steve, I think I am handing back to you. So
Thank you,
thank you
Chris.
very much.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to hear that the group is planning a redo and making use of what is still relevant and useful, but bringing it up to date and using it in different contexts. So, and your just to repeat your invitation for people to join the work group. We have a number of different structures in the open group, from forums and work groups and working groups and consortia and various other names of things. But this is, as you say, a group that is open to all members of the open group, regardless. So you could be in the security forum or the architecture forum or the OSDU forum, wherever it might be that your organization is a member of. Then
Yeah.
You're welcome to participate in this, and we'd love to have you. So please do, if you're listening to this either live or later on. So a couple of questions initially, Chris. You talked about the scaling model, and
Yes.
mostly in the context of starting as a new organization and a small organization, and moving up until the hopefully the enduring enterprise stage. Um, that's presumably also relevant to uh, an an already existing organization or part of an organization
Hmm.
that's maybe going through its digital transformation and trying something different for maybe one part of the business. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I described it, and probably the easiest way to think about it is when you think about starting from the startup company, one or two people getting together with an idea and starting out anew, and to how that then potentially grows up through those stages to the enduring enterprise. But yeah, equally true, even within the context of perhaps an established company that's might be starting out some new business unit, some new product line, and forming around that. And again, I've seen it kind of play out within my own company, how one or two people might have an idea, create some sort of business case, get some seed corn funding, grow that into a small team, and so on up those stages. So yeah, absolutely. It applies to not just to the sort of fresh new company, but also to something that might be incubated within the context of an existing organization that might come about as a result of some kind of transformation type of activities.
Right. Great stuff. Okay. And I think you're making an important point. You've seen it in your organization. What we're ideally looking for is obviously things that folks are seeing in the real world and in their day jobs inside their organization, so that we can start to see start to build a best practice, and what works and equally what doesn't is also good to
Yes.
know. Um, so, a couple more questions come in. How did you decide on what to keep and reuse from the original DP box from 2020?
Well, really nothing terribly sophisticated. It's just simply, amongst the members, um, discussing and reviewing the content, and thinking about what parts of it are still relevant, are still that's still valuable, that still seem to make sense to us, and then of course how they would fit into the structure, the types of things that we're writing about within the new DPBOK. Um, and then, as I alluded to as I was talking about it earlier on, there are some parts that, you know, being as it was written in 2019, some years ago now, yeah, you couldn't just simply pull forward because it's referring perhaps to a piece of technology that's now been replaced by something else. So that's not something you could just directly pull forward. So we did do a piece of work where we took a pass through the whole thing and sort of had a bit of a think about, is that still current? Is that still true? Is that still valuable? Or is that something that's now aged out, perhaps past its best before date, so to speak?
Right.
And came up with a little bit of a short list. But it essentially is just the work of the members, and
Yeah.
that's how it should be within the working group, to look at the material and decide what we want to work with and what we think still has value to us as practitioners in the field.
Right. That's it's good, and particularly it's good to remember that the original origins of DP Book were actually a book that a longtime member of ours now, Forrester analyst Charlie Betts wrote,
Yes.
Managing Digital, which was based on the course that he was teaching at the time.
Yes.
So it sort of had this uh, academic based on practice origins, and then obviously through the original work group, people adapted it to be more about what happens in practice, and now of course updating it again. So it's great to see
Yeah.
its story there.
Yep.
So
Loving your work, Mr. Betts.
yes, yes, great stuff, Charlie. So another question's come in. Do you think AI is challenging the DPBOK program and patterns? Digital transformation projects are already adapting to it. For example, cloud computing, auto scaling solutions are already using AI.
Um, of course, we all know there's been lots of use of AI, particularly the generative AI style functions, these chat-based interfaces fed by large language models. Yeah, they're creeping into all sorts of areas. However, as yet, and I would never put myself forward as a specialist in this field, but my very clear understanding is that as yet, we're still at a stage where these models need to be fed by some underlying knowledge, either gained simply from trawling the internet, as indeed a lot of the large language models are, or by some other introduction of some underlying knowledge. And then the AI is giving you some, essentially just some very powerful tools to digest all of that knowledge, and deliver it in a more, I mentioned these more conversational styles. But we are not yet, I believe, at the stage where those AIs are coming up with completely novel new techniques that do not have their roots in any of the knowledge that it has been trained with.
Mm.
Um, so there is still absolutely the need, and the place, for people to, like the working groups, to come up with this underlying knowledge. But yes, of course, the AIs are becoming more powerful. They're becoming more widely used. And like I mentioned in one of the slides, we are thinking about, well, what does that mean for us? What should we be doing to kind of ride this wave of AI tools?
No, absolutely, and it's you mentioned it at the beginning, but the DPBOK is one of the standards in the Open Group's portfolio of digital open standards, where so to
Indeed.
some extent, what we've been working on is going in this direction, obviously, of making the standards more usable together and more accessible and searchable and all of those good things, leading up to potentially a time when AI will be a useful tool across the portfolio at some point. So yeah,
Indeed. Yes, you could
it's
see something like that. Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, rather than it being a threat as such, I think it can be a useful tool for us. But Chris,
Absolutely.
I speak for myself, obviously, but I think I can speak for the attendees as well. Thank you for what you've shared today. There have been some very positive comments in the chat about your presentation, so thank you for summarising it. And I hope you trigger some interest, and wish you and the work group the best of luck going forward. And we'll hear more about this in the coming months and years, I'm sure.
Thank you very much, Steve, and love to see any of you in the near future in the working group.
Great.
Get in touch.
Thank you, Chris Frost. Great to have you back.